Spring had always been my favorite season. There was something about the way the air smelled fresh, and the nights felt just a little warmer that made it feel magical. It was the season of renewal, of life, but that year, spring felt wrong, like something sour had seeped into the ground and tainted the air. I noticed it the first night I stayed at my uncle's old cabin in the woods. The cabin sat at the edge of a dense forest where wildflowers usually bloomed in brilliant colors. When I arrived, the flowers were there, but they seemed faded, drooping as if weighed down by an invisible hand. The bird song that normally filled the woods was almost absent, except for the occasional sharp, high-pitched cry from somewhere deep within the trees. I tried to brush off the unease, blaming it on the long drive and lack of sleep. I had come here to get away from the city, to breathe, to write, to clear my head. I wasn't going to let a few dead flowers and silent trees scare me off. The first evening was uneventful. I unpacked my things, set up my laptop on the old wooden desk by the window, and made myself a simple dinner. Outside, the woods swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows that crept across the clearing. I told myself it was peaceful, even if it didn't quite feel that way. As night fell, the world outside turned black, the kind of darkness you never experience in the city. No streetlights, no passing cars, just an endless wall of pitch-black trees. It was around midnight when I first heard it. The sound of something moving just beyond the tree line. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. It wasn't a deer. I grew up around wildlife, and I knew the difference between the delicate crunch of a deer's steps and the deliberate heavy footfalls I was hearing now. Whatever it was big, and it was pacing back and forth, just out of sight. I told myself it was probably a bear, maybe a moose. I laughed a little too loudly, trying to shake the chill creeping up my spine. I turned on the porch light and peered outside. Nothing, just trees swaying gently in the wind. Still, I decided it might be a good idea to lock the doors and windows. You know, just in case. I lay in bed afterward, the blankets pulled up to my chin, like a child trying to ward off monsters. My heart refused to settle into a steady rhythm. I kept listening, straining my ears for any sound out of place. After a while, the pacing stopped. The forest settled into a heavy silence again. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sharp tapping on the window beside my bed. My heart slammed into my throat. I stared at the window, too afraid to move. The tapping came again, deliberate, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just a branch. Just the wind. I didn't dare look. When morning finally came, I forced myself to inspect the window. There were no branches anywhere near it. Nothing that could have caused that noise. The ground beneath the window was soft, still muddy from recent rains, but there were no footprints, no marks. It was as if whatever had been tapping had floated there, leaving no sign of its presence. I spent most of the day trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Sleep deprivation could do weird things to the mind. I went for a walk down to the small creek a few hundred yards from the cabin, hoping the sunshine and fresh air would clear my head. As I wandered through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, there was nothing but endless woods, whispering and creaking in the breeze. I stayed by the creek longer than I should have, trying to delay going back. As the sun started dipping, below the horizon, I finally forced myself to return to the cabin. The forest seemed different on the way back. The trees looked closer together, the path harder to find. More than once, I stumbled over roots I could have sworn hadn't been there before. By the time I saw the cabin again through the trees, the last light of day was slipping away. As I approached the porch, I noticed something strange. There was a small object lying on the steps. A dead sparrow, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were wide open, staring up at me. I felt sick. I didn't touch it. I stepped around it carefully and hurried inside, bolting the door behind me. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I turned on every light, even though the electricity here was unreliable and flickered constantly. That night the tapping returned. It started earlier, just after sunset. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't just one window. It was several. First by the bedroom, then the kitchen, then the living room. It was moving, circling the cabin. I sat frozen on the couch, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. At one point, I thought I saw movement just beyond the glass. A fleeting glimpse of a pale face. No features I could make out, just the unmistakable shape of a head watching. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there until the first weak light of dawn filtered through the windows. The tapping stopped with the sunrise, like it was obeying some invisible rule. I wanted to pack my bags and leave immediately, but I couldn't explain it. I felt rooted there, trapped. Like if I tried to leave, whatever was out there would simply follow. I told myself I would give it one more night. Just one. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. Maybe it was some prankster, some sick joke. Maybe there was a logical explanation. There had to be. But deep down, I already knew. Spring was supposed to be a time of life. But something was out there. Something that didn't belong. Something that had been waiting for me to come back. The next day felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened into something tangible, pressing down on my chest with every breath. I barely ate. Every time I moved through the cabin, I felt the weight of unseen eyes crawling across my skin. The creaks in the floorboards seemed louder, longer, echoing strangely through the empty rooms. I kept glancing out the windows without meaning to, half expecting to see that pale face staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just the trees standing still in the morning light, their bare branches clawing at the gray sky. Even the usual hum of insects and chirping birds had fallen silent. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. By noon, I decided I couldn't stay inside anymore. I had to know what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight and my jacket and headed toward the woods, forcing myself to retrace my steps back to the creek. If there were footprints, broken branches, anything unusual, I would find it. The walk was eerily quiet. The forest didn't feel like it had the day before. The air was colder. Despite the supposed warmth of spring, every few steps, I thought I heard something behind me. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. But when I turned around, the woods stood perfectly still, like they were mocking me. It took longer than it should have, but I finally reached the creek. The water was lower than usual, trickling lazily between rocks. I stood there for a while, scanning the banks, searching for some sign that I wasn't just losing my mind. That's when I saw it. Across the creek, carved into the trunk of a wide ancient oak, were markings. At first glance, they looked like random scratches. the work of some bored teenager, or maybe an animal. But as I moved closer, crossing the shallow water carefully, I realized they formed symbols, crude, angular, and deeply gouged into the bark. I didn't recognize them. They didn't look like any language I knew, but they radiated something wrong. Standing near them made the hair on my arm stand up. It felt like the air around the tree was vibrating, humming with a low, almost imperceptible sound. I reached out a hand without thinking, drawn to the symbols like a moth to flame. The moment my fingers brushed the bark, a sudden chill shot through my body. My vision blurred. For a heartbeat, the forest around me changed, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes, the ground blackened and cracked like dry bone, the sky overhead a swirling, colorless void. Then it was gone. I stumbled backward, gasping. The woods returned to normal, but I felt different, like something had peeled back the surface of reality for just a moment and let me see the rot underneath. I didn't touch the tree again. I practically ran back to the cabin, heart pounding in my ears. Whatever was happening, it wasn't in my imagination. Something had taken root in these woods, something old and angry, and very much awake. When I got back, the dead sparrow was gone from the porch. In its place was a small pile of stones stacked neatly into a pyramid shape. It hadn't been there when I left, and I hadn't seen or heard anyone. There was no car, no footprints leading up to the cabin. I didn't dare disturb the stones. I stepped carefully around them and locked myself inside. That night, the tapping started earlier than before. It wasn't cautious anymore. It was aggressive, relentless, banging and rattling at the windows and doors, as if whatever was outside was growing bolder, less afraid. I stayed on the floor by the couch, clutching my flashlight, too scared to move. At some point, the front door handle began to jiggle. First lightly, then harder, like someone was testing it, trying to figure out how to get inside. I thought about calling for help, but there was no signal out here. The nearest neighbor was miles away. Even if I screamed, no one would hear me. The door stopped shaking after what felt like an eternity, but the tapping continued. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, there came a different sound. A voice. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. Let me in. I squeezed my eyes shut, plugging my ears with my hands. Number, I wasn't hearing this. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Let me in, the voice repeated, louder this time, right outside the living room window. It sounded wrong, like someone trying to mimic a human voice, but getting the tone just slightly off. Too flat, too deliberate, like a recording being played back by something that didn't understand emotion. I stayed silent, frozen, my entire body trembling. Hours seemed to crawl by before the noises finally stopped, just before dawn. When the first light of day crept through the windows, I finally dared to move. Every inch of my body ached from staying curled up for so long. I forced myself to stand, to check the front door. It was still locked, no sign of forced entry. But there, pressed against the glass of the living room window, was a handprint. It weren't human. The fingers were too long, too thin, and there were only 4 of them. I staggered back, my mind reeling. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't my imagination. Something was out there, and it wanted me. Badly. The rest of the day passed in a haze of fear and paranoia. I barely moved from the couch, watching the forest through the windows. I knew I should leave, but something deep inside me whispered that it wouldn't matter. that whatever had marked me out there at the tree had already found its way inside, invisible, intangible, and was just waiting, waiting for nightfall, waiting for me to open the door, waiting for me to let it in. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I realized with a growing sense of horror that it wasn't just outside anymore. It was already here. That night, the darkness inside the cabin felt almost alive. Every corner seemed to pulse with a silent, malevolent breath. I turned on every light I could find, but it didn't matter. The shadows only seemed to grow deeper, pooling around the edges of the rooms like dark, oily stains. The tapping didn't start this time. It didn't need to. Instead, I heard movement, soft, slow, dragging sounds, inside the cabin. I sat frozen on the couch, my flashlight clutched so tightly that my fingers ached. I knew I was alone. I had locked the doors. I had checked every window, every room. But something was moving. Somewhere down the hall, near the bedroom, a door creaked open with an agonizing groan. My heart leapt into my throat. I told myself not to go look, to stay put. But my body, as if no longer under my full control, rose from the couch and crept toward the hallway. The flashlight's beam wavered as my hand trembled. The cabin seemed to stretch around me, the hallway longer than it had ever been before. Like a dream where the farther you walk, the farther your destination recedes. I reached the bedroom door. It was wide open now, swaying gently, as if something had just passed through it. The room beyond was pitch black. I aimed my flashlight inside. At first, I thought it was empty. But then slowly, something began to take shape in the beam of light. A figure stood in the far corner, partially hidden by the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs were wrong, bending in ways human joints weren't meant to. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, and from where I stood, I couldn't see a face. I stumbled back instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just watched. The air grew colder by the second, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then, with a sudden jerking motion, the figure stepped forward. The beam of the flashlight flickered violently. I slapped it in panic, desperate to keep it alive. The figure moved again, lurching toward me with grotesque, twitching steps. Each movement accompanied by a sickening crack, like bones snapping. It was only a few feet away now. In the split second before the flashlight sputtered out completely, I saw its face. Or rather, the absence of one. Where its features should have been, there was only smooth, pale flesh like a canvas, waiting for a horrific creation. And yet somehow, without eyes or mouth, I knew it was smiling. The light died. I turned and ran, slamming the bedroom door shut behind me. I could hear it, thudding against the wood, scratching at the door with ragged fingernails. I bolted down the hallway, fumbling for the front door. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the lock undone. I could hear it coming, the skittering, disjointed steps, the low groan of the floorboards under its weight. Finally, the door gave way. I burst out into the cold night, not daring to look back, and sprinted toward the trees. My bare feet hit the frozen earth, sharp rocks cutting into my soles. But I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The woods were different now. Twisted, wrong. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The moon was hidden behind a thick curtain of clouds, plunging everything into near total darkness. I ran blindly, crashing through bushes, scraping against bark, tripping and falling again and again. Behind me, I could hear it following, always just a few steps behind. Never running, just steadily, inevitably moving closer. I didn't know where I was going. I had lost the path long ago. All I knew was that if I stopped, even for a moment, it would catch me. Somewhere in the distance, I saw a flicker of light, a faint, pulsing glow between the trees. I stumbled toward it, driven by a primal, desperate hope. The light grew brighter as I neared, until I burst through the tree line into a clearing. In the center stood another tree, huge, ancient, gnarled beyond belief. And nailed to its trunk was an old, rusted lantern burning with a sickly green flame. The same symbols I had seen carved into the oak by the creek were here, but deeper, more numerous, wrapping around the tree like a crown of thorns. Without thinking, I collapsed at the base of the tree, gasping for air. The clearing felt different. The oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted just slightly. It was still there, lurking at the edges but weaker. Behind me, I heard the figure stop at the edge of the clearing. It wouldn't enter. It paced back and forth at the boundary, its movements frantic now, almost angry. It scratched and clawed at the air, letting out a sound that made my blood run cold. A high, keening wail that sounded like a child crying and a wild animal screaming all at once. I pressed my back against the tree, trying to disappear into it, feeling the rough bark biting into my skin. Tears blurred my vision. My mind raced, trying to understand. The symbols. They were a barrier, a protection. The figure shrieked again, and the sound seemed to tear through the clearing, rattling the lantern on its nail. I could see it better now, in the pulsing green light. Its arms hung too long, nearly brushing the ground. Its legs were twisted, one shorter than the other, forcing it into a loping, broken gait. Its faceless head tilted this way and that, as if trying to find a way around the invisible wall that kept it at bay. It hated me. No, not me. It hated the tree, the light, the symbols, and it was patient. It would wait. Already I could feel exhaustion dragging at my limbs. The cold was sinking deeper into my bones. How long could I stay here, crouched at the base of this cursed tree? The figure settled back onto its haunches at the edge of the clearing, still and silent now, watching, waiting. It knew I couldn't stay awake forever. And when I fell asleep, when I let my guard down, it would be there. I don't know how long I sat there, huddled at the base of the ancient tree. Minutes, hours. It all blurred into an endless frozen moment. My body ached from the cold, my mind fogged by exhaustion. The green flame in the lantern flickered weakly, growing dimmer with each passing heartbeat. And still, the figure waited. Every so often, it would twitch, its faceless head jerking toward me like a predator, testing a wounded animal. The knowledge that it was just beyond reach gnawed at my sanity. I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't risk it. Every time my eyelids drooped, I would jolt awake, heart pounding. But slowly, inevitably, sleep was winning. I tried everything, digging my nails into my arms, whispering to myself, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, but it was useless. My body was shutting down. I don't remember actually falling asleep. One moment I was fighting to stay conscious. The next, I was dreaming. At least, I thought it was a dream. In the dream, I stood in the same clearing. But everything was twisted. The trees were blackened skeletons, their branches clawing at a blood-red sky. The ancient tree in the center was burning, its flames colorless and cold. And around the edges of the clearing, dozens of figures like the one that had hunted me were gathered, their blank faces turned toward me. Watching, waiting, from somewhere deep within the earth, a voice spoke, not in words, but in emotions, hunger, rage, possession. The figures moved closer. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs refused to obey. I could only stand there, paralyzed, as they surrounded me. The nearest one reached out a long skeletal hand and touched my chest. The pain was instant, white hot, as if it were tearing something from inside me. I woke with a violent gasp, lurching upright. The lantern's flame was almost gone. A pathetic sputtering glow, and the figure, the real one, was closer now. It had breached the invisible boundary. Somehow, while I slept, the protection had weakened. It was only a few feet away. Its faceless head tilted, as if savoring the moment. I scrambled to my feet, my mind a frenzy of panic. I couldn't stay. I had to move. I had to get away before it was too late. I bolted from the tree, sprinting toward the dark forest beyond. The creature shrieked behind me, a sound so full of rage and triumph that it nearly knocked me to my knees. The forest closed in around me, suffocating and endless. I didn't know where I was going. I had no plan. I just ran, driven by pure terror, hoping, praying, that I could find another sanctuary, another ancient tree, another lantern, but the woods seemed to shift around me, the paths twisting into impossible, labyrinthine patterns. I could hear it chasing me now, no longer slow and methodical, but fast and wild, crashing through the underbrush with a furious, desperate hunger. I stumbled into a clearing, smaller this time, ringed by dead, skeletal trees. In the center stood a dilapidated well, its stones crumbling and black with mold. No tree, no symbols, no protection. I was trapped. I turned to run, but the figure was already there, blocking the way. It moved closer, with twitching, unnatural steps, its limbs jerking and contorting. For the first time, I saw its mouth, a wide, jagged tear, opening where its smooth face had been, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. It opened its mouth wider, wider, an impossible, gaping maw that seemed to stretch into infinity. I backed away until my legs hit the well's edge. I had two choices: be devoured by whatever this thing was, or take my chances with the darkness below. Without thinking, I threw myself backward into the well. The fall was endless. I plummeted through suffocating darkness, the air growing colder and thicker until it felt like I was sinking through ice. And then impact. I landed hard on something soft yet solid, moss maybe, or centuries of rotted leaves. I lay there for a moment, gasping, my body screaming in pain. Above me, I could see a faint circle of night sky, far, far away. And then movement. Dozens of pale shapes slithered along the walls of the well, descending toward me. I stumbled to my feet, searching frantically for any escape, any exit. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic. A door. Embedded in the side of the well was a rusted ancient door, half buried in the stone. Without hesitation, I yanked it open and stumbled through. I found myself in a narrow tunnel, the air thick with the stench of decay. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the earth. I had no choice but to follow it. The deeper I went, the more the walls seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the earth itself were alive. Whispers echoed around me, voices that sounded almost familiar, calling my name with pleading, mournful tones. I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, lit by thousands of those sickly green flames floating in midair. In the center of the cavern stood an altar, and chained to it was a figure, a woman, her body broken and twisted, her face frozen in a silent scream. Around her, dozens more of the faceless creatures lurked, their bodies writhing in the flickering light. One by one, they turned toward me. I realized then that there was no escape. This place, this was where they brought those who wandered too far into the woods on spring nights. This was their home, and I was their newest prize. As they closed in, their mouths opening in unison to emit that bone-chilling wail, I understood the truth. The cabin, the tree, the symbols. They were never meant to keep them out. They were meant to trap me inside. And on this spring night, under the watchful eyes of the faceless horde, I became part of the legend. Another lost soul. Another story whispered around campfires. Another warning ignored by those foolish enough to walk into the woods when winter ends and the world is still hungry for the living. I screamed until my voice broke, and then the darkness swallowed me whole.